In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and luxury was a way of life, there stood a hotel that promised its guests an unforgettable stay. The marble floors gleamed under chandeliers, the staff moved with practiced precision, and every corner seemed to whisper elegance. It was here, on a chilly evening in late autumn, that a man walked through the revolving doors, his presence commanding attention without him saying a word. He wasn't flashy or loud nothing about. Him screamed, "Look at me." Instead, he carried himself with quiet confidence, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that hinted at wealth but didn't scream it. His suitcase was modest, his watch understated, yet something about him made people take notice. This was no ordinary traveler. This was someone who exuded power, even if it came wrapped in humility. He introduced himself as Mr. Li Wei, a name unfamiliar to most, but one that would soon leave a lasting impression on everyone inside the hotel. Mr. Li checked into the penthouse suite, the kind of room reserved for celebrities, billionaires, and royalty. But unlike those flamboyant personalities, he didn't ask for champagne on ice or demand special treatment. All he wanted was peace, a place to rest after what must have been a long journey. Yet from the moment he stepped into the lobby, things weren't smooth sailing. Communication became an obstacle neither he nor the staff had anticipated. The first hiccup came when the receptionist tried to confirm his reservation. Her English was polished, her smile warm, but when she asked questions, Mr. Li struggled to respond. His answers were slow, heavily accented, and sometimes incomplete. He nodded politely, trying to keep up, but frustration began creeping into his expression. Words like Wi-Fi password and breakfast timings turned into a game of charades, with both parties gesturing wildly just to make sense of each other. By the time they sorted out the basics, the tension was palpable. It didn't stop there. When Mr. Li called room service to order dinner, the operator misunderstood his request for noodles and sent up a plate of spaghetti instead. Later, when he needed help arranging transportation, the concierge fumbled through Google Translate, offering solutions that barely scratched the surface of what he actually needed. Each interaction ended with polite smiles and awkward silences, leaving Mr. Li feeling more isolated than ever. For the hotel staff, dealing with international guests was nothing new. They prided themselves on catering to clients from all corners of the globe. But Mr. Li was different. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no impatience in his tone, only a growing sadness that lingered beneath the surface. He wasn't difficult, he was simply lost in translation. And while some employees brushed off their inability to communicate with him as unavoidable, others couldn't shake the feeling that they were failing him in ways they couldn't fully articulate. Among these observers was a woman who worked behind the scenes, someone whose job rarely put her in the spotlight. She was part of the housekeeping team, responsible for keeping the room spotless and ensuring everything ran smoothly behind closed doors. To the guests, she was invisible, a blur in a uniform, moving quietly from one task to another. But to those who knew her, she was anything but ordinary. Her coworkers often joked that she had eyes everywhere. She noticed details others missed. The guest who always left a half-empty coffee cup by the window, signaling loneliness. The family who requested extra towels every day because their toddler loved bath time. The businessman who never tipped but always left handwritten thank you notes. These little observations mattered to her because, to her, every person had a story worth understanding. On this particular night, as she pushed her cart down the hallway toward the penthouse suite, she couldn't help but feel drawn to Mr. Li's situation. Earlier, she'd overheard snippets of conversations between the staff about how complicated he was, how hard it was to deal with him. But watching him from afar, she saw none of that. What she saw was a man caught between two worlds, struggling to find common ground in a place where he should have felt welcome. Something about his plight resonated with her. Maybe it was because she too had once felt misunderstood, overlooked, judged based on appearances rather than substance. Or maybe it was simply the kindness in her nature, the instinct to reach out when someone seemed alone. Whatever the reason, she decided then and there that she wouldn't let him remain stranded in silence. Little did she know, her decision would spark a chain of events that would change not only his life, but hers as well. As she approached the door to his suite, her heart raced not out of fear, but anticipation. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say or do, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stand by and watch another day go by without trying to help. After all, sometimes the smallest gestures can bridge the widest gaps. And in this grand hotel, where luxury met loneliness, perhaps it was time for a connection that transcended language, culture, and expectation. The next morning, the woman from housekeeping began her shift like any other day. She wheeled her cart down the long, carpeted hallways, knocking softly on doors before entering rooms to tidy up. But when she reached the penthouse suite, she hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure what she was walking into or how Mr. Lee would react if she tried to engage with him directly. Still, something inside her urged her to take the risk. When she entered the suite, she found him sitting by the window, staring out at the city skyline. The room was immaculate. He hadn't left much of a mess for her to clean. That wasn't unusual for some guests. They were too busy or too private to leave traces of their presence. But there was an air of quiet frustration around him, almost as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He glanced up briefly when she came in, then returned his gaze to the view outside. She started tidying up quietly, straightening pillows, replacing towels, and dusting surfaces. As she worked, she overheard him muttering under his breath in Mandarin. His tone was sharp, tinged with irritation, and though she didn't catch every word, she understood enough to know he was venting about the difficulties of the previous night. Something about miscommunication with the front desk, followed by complaints about how no one seemed to listen. Her heart sank. It was clear that he felt misunderstood and, worse, dismissed. She'd seen this kind of frustration before, not just in guests but in people everywhere. When you're unable to express yourself clearly, it's easy to feel invisible, like your voice doesn't matter. And while most of the staff might have brushed off his struggles as inevitable, she couldn't ignore them. Not anymore. Taking a deep breath, she decided to take a chance. She approached him cautiously, holding a fresh towel in one hand. She said softly, her words flowing effortlessly in Mandarin. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Mr. was visibly startled, his head snapping toward her as though he'd just heard a ghost speak. His eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked unsure whether to laugh or cry. No one had spoken to him in his native language since arriving in New York, not even the concierge who claimed to know a little Chinese. After a pause, relief washed over his face. For the first time since stepping foot in the hotel, someone understood him completely. Someone saw him not as a wealthy foreigner or a difficult guest, but as a person with thoughts, feelings, and needs. He broke into a hesitant smile and replied in Mandarin, thanking her for speaking his language. They exchanged pleasantries. At first, simple greetings and polite questions about his stay. Then, slowly, they dove deeper. He explained how frustrating it had been trying to navigate such a high-end establishment without being able to communicate effectively. Room service orders gone wrong, transportation arrangements botched, basic requests turning into hour-long charades, all because no one spoke his language. She listened intently, nodding along as he spoke. What struck her most was how vulnerable he sounded. Despite his wealth and success, He carried himself with humility, admitting that he felt lost in this unfamiliar environment. "It's like I'm invisible," he admitted, his voice tinged with sadness. "People see my money, but they don't see me." Her heart ached for him. She knew exactly what it felt like to be overlooked, to have assumptions made based on appearances alone. Growing up, she'd faced her fair share of stereotypes, people assuming she was less intelligent because of where she came from, or dismissing her contributions because of her job title. Yet here she was, standing in front of a man who, despite having everything money could buy, still craved understanding. Determined to help, she offered to assist him with whatever he needed. Over the next hour, they tackled the pileup of unresolved issues together. She called down to the concierge desk, explaining his preferences clearly in English while translating his responses back to him in Mandarin. Together, they sorted out the Wi-Fi password issue, clarified his breakfast order. He wanted congee, not oatmeal, and arranged for a car service that actually understood his destination. By the end of their conversation, Mr. Lee looked visibly lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his chest. He thanked her repeatedly, his gratitude genuine and heartfelt. "I can't tell you how much this means to me," he said, switching between Mandarin and broken English. "You've done more for me in 1 hour than anyone else has done in days." As they wrapped up their discussion, he asked her how she came to speak Mandarin so fluently. She hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to share. Her story wasn't something she talked about often. It was personal, intimate, and tied to memories both joyful and painful. But something about the way he looked at her, with curiosity rather than judgment, made her want to open up. She explained that she grew up in Brooklyn, raised by adoptive parents who had emigrated from Taiwan. From a young age, she was immersed in their culture, learning Mandarin alongside English. Her childhood home was filled with the aroma of stir-fried dishes, the sound of traditional music, and the rhythm of conversations in 2 languages. Over time, she became fluent not just in the language itself, but in the nuances and subtleties that came with it. "I guess you could say I've always been a bridge between worlds," she said with a small smile. "Growing up, I had to navigate 2 very different cultures, figuring out how to fit into both without losing myself. It taught me a lot about listening, about finding common ground even when things seem impossible." Mr. Lee nodded thoughtfully, clearly moved by her words. "You are remarkable," he said finally, his voice soft but sincere. "Not many people would take the time to understand someone like me. Most would simply give up." She shrugged modestly, brushing off the compliment. "It's not about me," she replied. "It's about making sure people feel seen and heard. That's all any of us really want, isn't it?" Their conversation continued for a while longer, shifting from practical matters to more personal topics. He told her about his life in China, his rise in the business world, and the challenges of expanding his ventures internationally. She shared bits and pieces of her own journey, careful not to reveal too much, but offering enough to let him know she understood his struggles. By the time she finished cleaning the suite and prepared to leave, their dynamic had shifted entirely. What had started as a professional interaction had blossomed into something deeper, a connection built on mutual respect and shared humanity. As she pushed her cart out of the room, Mr. Lee called after her, asking if she'd be willing to help him again tomorrow. Without hesitation, she agreed. Walking away, she couldn't help but reflect on the encounter. Helping Mr. Lee hadn't just been about fixing logistical problems. It had been about bridging a gap, creating a space where he could feel understood and valued. And in doing so, she realized she'd also given herself a gift, the reminder that her unique background, far from being a liability, was a source of strength. Back in the staff break room later that afternoon, whispers began to circulate among her coworkers. Word had spread quickly about the mysterious connection between the Chinese millionaire and the Black Maid. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all agreed that something extraordinary was happening. For now, though, she kept quiet about the details, content to let the story unfold in its own time. After all, some connections are meant to be cherished privately, away from prying eyes and idle gossip. By the third day of their unexpected partnership, the bond between the housekeeper and the Chinese millionaire had grown stronger. Each morning, she would arrive at his suite with her cleaning cart, but instead of focusing solely on tidying up, they found themselves diving into deeper conversations. Their talks ranged from practical matters, like troubleshooting another mix-up with room service, to more personal reflections about life, culture, and the challenges of navigating unfamiliar worlds. Mr. Lee began opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He shared stories about his childhood in rural China, where resources were scarce but community was strong. He spoke about the sacrifices his parents made to send him to school, instilling in him a relentless work ethic that eventually led to his success. Yet despite his achievements, he admitted feeling like an outsider in many parts of the world. Especially in places like New York, where people often judged him based on stereotypes rather than substance. She listened intently, nodding along as he spoke. His words resonated deeply with her own experiences. Growing up as a black woman adopted by Taiwanese immigrants, she'd spent much of her life straddling two identities, never fully belonging to either. She told him how hard it was to reconcile those two worlds, how some days she felt too American for her family's traditions, while other days she felt too different for the kids at school. It was a balancing act she still navigated daily. Even as an adult, hearing her story, Mr. Lee looked at her with newfound admiration. "You are stronger than I realized," he said softly. "To live between two cultures and still find your way, that takes courage." She smiled, brushing off the compliment. "We all carry burdens, don't we? Yours might look different from mine, but at the end of the day, we're just trying to make sense of this crazy world." Their connection went beyond language. It was rooted in empathy. Both understood what it meant to feel misunderstood, to be seen through the lens of assumptions rather than reality. And in each other, they found a rare kind of solace, a safe space where they could drop their guard and simply exist without judgment. As their friendship deepened, so did their collaboration. Mr. Lee started relying on her not just for translation, but also for advice. One afternoon, he confided in her about a business meeting scheduled for later in the week. The stakes were high. It involved finalizing a deal for a luxury skyscraper project aimed at bridging Eastern and Western markets. But cultural differences and communication barriers had stalled progress, leaving him frustrated and uncertain about the outcome. "They don't understand me," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And I don't always understand them. It's like we're speaking completely different languages, even when we're using the same words." She tilted her head thoughtfully, considering his dilemma. Then, after a moment of silence, she offered a bold suggestion. "Why don't you bring me along to the meeting?" He stared at her, surprised by the proposal. "You?" he asked, not out of doubt but genuine curiosity. "Yes," she replied firmly. "I can help translate, sure, but it's more than that. I know how to read people. I've been doing it my whole life. I can spot tension before it escalates, smooth over awkward moments, and make sure everyone feels heard. You need someone who understands both sides, and that's me." At first, Mr. Lee hesitated. Bringing a hotel maid to a high-stakes business meeting wasn't exactly conventional. What would his partners think? Would they see it as unprofessional? Or, worse, a sign of weakness? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized she was right. Her presence could be the missing piece, the bridge that connected two vastly different worlds. "All right," he said finally, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Let's do it. The morning of the meeting arrived, and nerves buzzed in the air. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that struck the perfect balance between professional and approachable. As they entered the sleek conference room together, all eyes turned toward them. The atmosphere was tense, filled with suits and sharp glances. When introductions were made, jaws dropped as she seamlessly translated complex financial terms and diplomatic phrasing, earning nods of approval from both sides. Her role quickly expanded beyond translation. She noticed subtle cues: the slight frown of disapproval from one executive, the impatient tapping of a pen from another, and intervened tactfully to ease tensions. She encouraged quieter voices to speak up and gently redirected heated debates back to productive dialogue. By the end of the session, not only had key obstacles been resolved, but the mood had shifted entirely. Where there had once been frustration and mistrust, there was now mutual respect and understanding. As they left the building together, Mr. Lee turned to her, his expression a mix of awe and gratitude. "You were incredible," he said earnestly. "I couldn't have done it without you." She shrugged modestly, though pride swelled in her chest. "It's what I'm here for," she replied, "to help people connect, no matter where they come from." That evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant, Mr. Lee broached a topic that caught her off guard. "I want you to join my team," he said, his tone serious but warm. "Not just for meetings like today, but permanently. You have a gift, a unique ability to bring people together. I need someone like you by my side as I expand my ventures internationally." She blinked, taken aback by the offer. Joining his company would mean stepping out of the shadows, leaving behind the familiarity of her current life. It was a leap into the unknown, one that came with risks and uncertainties. Yet, as she considered his words, she realized something important. This was her chance to use her skills not just to clean rooms or assist guests, but to truly make a difference. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Over the tea. Next few days, she wrestled with the decision. On one hand, staying at the hotel offered stability, predictability, and comfort. On the other hand, working with Mr. Lee represented an opportunity to grow, to challenge herself, and to step into a role that aligned with her passions and talents. In the end, the choice became clear. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life wondering what could have been. She wanted to take a risk, to see where this path might lead. When she gave him her answer, his face lit up with joy. "You won't regret this," he promised. "Together, we'll build something extraordinary." And so, their partnership took on a new dimension. From that point forward, she wasn't just a housekeeper or a translator. She was a cultural liaison, a bridge builder, and a trusted ally. Together, they embarked on a journey that would take them far beyond the walls of the hotel, into a world where understanding transcended borders and connections changed lives. But even as their story unfolded, whispers continued to ripple through the hotel staff. Some admired her courage, others envied her luck, and a few dismissed her rise as mere coincidence. To her, though, none of that mattered. What mattered was the impact she was making, not just on Mr. Lee's life, but on her own. For the first time, she felt truly seen, valued, and empowered to embrace the fullness of who she was. The decision to leave the hotel and join Mr. Lee's team marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for her, but for both of them. Stepping away from the familiar routine of cleaning rooms and navigating hotel corridors felt like walking into uncharted territory. Yet, as she packed up her belongings on her last day, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't just a job change. It was an opportunity to rewrite her story, to step into a role that allowed her to use all the skills she'd honed over the years, her fluency in Mandarin, her ability to read people, and her knack for bridging cultural gaps. Her coworkers threw her a small farewell gathering in the staff break room. There were hugs, well wishes, and a few tears. Some of them joked about how they'd miss having someone around who could speak Millionaire, while others expressed genuine admiration for her courage. One older woman, who had worked at the hotel longer than anyone else, pulled her aside before she left. "You're going places, girl," she said with a knowing smile. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As she walked out of the hotel, for the final time, she paused at the entrance, looking back at the grand building that had been her workplace for so long. It wasn't perfect. It never was. But it had shaped her in ways she hadn't fully realized until now. With a deep breath, she turned toward the waiting car, where Mr. Lee sat patiently, ready to take her to their first official day of work together. Their initial days working side by side were a whirlwind of activity. Mr. Lee wasted no time introducing her to his inner circle, a tight-knit group of executives, advisors, and project managers who formed the backbone of his operations. At first, there was skepticism. A former hotel maid joining their ranks? Many questioned whether she belonged in such esteemed company. But Mr. Lee silenced any doubts quickly, explaining her invaluable role not only as a translator, but as a cultural mediator. "She understands things none of us do," he told them firmly. "And if we want to succeed globally, we need her perspective." Her responsibilities expanded rapidly. Beyond translating during meetings, she became the go-to person for navigating cross-cultural nuances. Whether it was explaining why certain gestures or phrases might offend Chinese partners, or helping Western colleagues adapt to Eastern business etiquette, she found herself constantly juggling roles. Her presence transformed tense negotiations into productive discussions and awkward misunderstandings into moments of clarity. One particularly memorable incident occurred during a video conference with a potential investor from Shanghai. The tense and moments of clarity. One particularly memorable incident occurred during a video conference with a potential investor from Shanghai. The ounce of clarity, monuments of clarity. Discussion had started smoothly enough, but midway through, the tone shifted. The investor grew increasingly frustrated, speaking faster and louder in Mandarin, while the American team exchanged confused glances. Sensing trouble, she leaned closer to listen intently. What she heard shocked her. The investor wasn't angry about the numbers being presented. He was upset because no one had acknowledged his seniority or shown proper respect according to Chinese customs. Without missing a beat, she interrupted the conversation, addressing the investor directly in Fluent Mandarin. "The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice. Are invaluable to us." The room fell silent as she spoke, her words calm yet commanding. The investor's expression softened almost immediately. By the end of the call, not only had the tension dissolved, but the deal was back on track. Afterward, the American executives approached her, shaking their heads in disbelief. "How did you know what to say?" one of them asked. "It's not just about words," she explained. "It's about understanding what matters to people, their values, their traditions, their pride. If you ignore those things, no amount of data or strategy will save you." Moments like these became frequent occurrences. Each success reinforced her importance within the team, earning her the trust and respect of colleagues who had once doubted her abilities. Even those who initially viewed her transition skeptically began seeking her advice, recognizing the unique value she brought to the table. Despite her growing confidence, the journey wasn't without its challenges. Adjusting to corporate life required learning curves she hadn't anticipated. Long hours, high-pressure deadlines, and the constant demand for perfection pushed her to her limits. There were days when self-doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she didn't belong after all. But every time she felt overwhelmed, she reminded herself of why she'd taken this leap in the first place, to prove that her background, far from being a liability, was her greatest asset. Mr. Lee noticed her struggles and often checked in to offer support. "You're doing better than you think," he assured her during one particularly grueling week. "Remember, growth doesn't come without discomfort. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." His encouragement meant more to her than he realized. It wasn't just about professional validation. It was about feeling seen and supported in a way she rarely had before. Their bond continued to deepen, evolving into a partnership built on mutual trust and admiration. He relied on her insights, while she drew inspiration from his vision and determination. Beyond the boardroom, their collaboration took them to cities around the world. From bustling metropolises in Asia to historic landmarks in Europe, they traveled extensively, meeting clients, exploring new markets, and forging connections that transcended borders. For her, these trips were eye-opening experiences, offering glimpses into cultures and lifestyles vastly different from anything she'd known. She marveled at the intricate dance of global commerce, where deals were sealed not just with contracts but with shared meals, handshakes, and stories. Through it all, she remained grounded, never losing sight of who she was or where she came from. No matter how glamorous or demanding the setting, she carried herself with humility and authenticity. Her ability to connect with people, from CEOs in tailored suits to street vendors selling snacks, earned her admiration wherever she went. One evening, as they strolled through a vibrant night market in Taipei, Mr. Lee turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if we hadn't met?" he asked. She smiled, considering the question. "Probably quieter," she admitted. "But I wouldn't trade this for anything." "Sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them." He nodded, his gaze softening. "I feel the same way. You've changed my life in ways I can't put into words." As they continued walking, surrounded by the hum of laughter and the aroma of sizzling food, she realized something profound. Their partnership wasn't just about business or language, it was about connection. In a world often divided by differences, they had found a way to build bridges, proving that true understanding begins with seeing each other as human beings first. And in doing so, they had created something extraordinary, a legacy of empathy, resilience, and hope. By the time a year had passed since she left the hotel, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The woman who once pushed a cleaning cart down quiet hallways now stood confidently in boardrooms, addressing executives and investors with poise and clarity. Her journey from housekeeping to becoming an integral part of a multinational enterprise was nothing short of remarkable. But it wasn't just about titles or roles. It was about growth, purpose, and finding her place in the world. The projects she worked on grew larger and more complex, each one presenting its own set of challenges and rewards. One of their most ambitious ventures involved developing a luxury skyscraper in New York, a symbol of unity between Eastern and Western cultures. The building would feature state-of-the-art design elements inspired by traditional Chinese architecture, alongside modern amenities tailored for global clientele. It was a bold vision, one that required navigating countless hurdles, from zoning laws to cultural sensitivities. Yet, every step of the way, she played a pivotal role in ensuring the project stayed true to its mission, bridging worlds. Her ability to connect people became the cornerstone of their success. Whether it was mediating disagreements between architects and developers or fostering relationships with local communities affected by the construction, she approached every situation with empathy and understanding. She knew how to listen not just to words, but to emotions, intentions, and unspoken needs. And because of that, she earned the trust of everyone involved, from construction workers on the ground to high-profile stakeholders at the top. But as much as she thrived professionally, her personal transformation was equally profound. Traveling the world opened her eyes to new perspectives and possibilities. In Tokyo, she marveled at the precision and discipline of Japanese craftsmanship. In Paris, she soaked in the elegance and artistry of French culture. Each destination taught her something valuable, not just about others but about herself. She realized that her identity wasn't confined to any single label. She wasn't just a black woman or someone raised by Taiwanese immigrants. She was a mosaic of experiences, shaped by every person she met and every challenge she overcame. Mr. Lee noticed the changes in her too. Gone was the reserved housekeeper who had first spoken to him in Mandarin months earlier. In her place stood a confident, capable woman who commanded respect without demanding it. He often joked that he owed his success to her, though deep down he meant it sincerely. Their partnership had become something greater than either of them individually, a testament to what could be achieved when two people chose to see beyond surface-level differences and focus on shared humanity. Back at the hotel where it all began, whispers about her continued long after she'd moved on. Some staff members dismissed her rise as luck, while others admired her courage and determination. A few even felt inspired to pursue their own dreams, realizing that opportunities could come from the most unexpected places. The older woman who had wished her well on her last day still talked about her fondly, telling new hires, "That girl proved that no matter where you start, you can go anywhere if you're willing to take a chance." For Mr. Lee, her impact extended far beyond business. She reminded him of the importance of humility and connection in leadership. Before meeting her, he had often focused solely on results, driven by the relentless pursuit of success. But working alongside her taught him to value relationships, human element behind every deal, contract, or negotiation. He began approaching his work with a renewed sense of purpose, striving not only to build structures but to create meaningful connections that lasted long after the ink dried on paper. One evening, as they celebrated the groundbreaking ceremony for the skyscraper project, Mr. Lee raised a toast to her. They stood on a rooftop overlooking the city skyline, surrounded by colleagues and friends who had supported them along the way. "To you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You've changed my life and this company in ways I'll never forget. Thank you for believing in me, even when I doubted myself." She smiled, feeling a lump form in her throat. "And thank you for seeing me," she replied softly, "for giving me a chance to show the world what I'm capable of." As fireworks lit up the night sky, she reflected on how far she'd come. From the quiet corridors of a Manhattan hotel to the bustling streets of international cities, her journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet, through it all, one thing remained constant: the power of connection. Whether it was helping a frustrated guest feel understood or bringing together diverse teams to achieve a common goal, her life had always been about building bridges. In that moment, standing beside Mr. Lee and looking out at the glittering city below, she realized something important. Success wasn't measured by wealth or titles. It was measured by the lives you touched and the barriers you broke down. Together, they had created something extraordinary, not just for themselves, but for everyone whose paths they crossed. As the celebration wound down and guests began to leave, she lingered on the rooftop, soaking in the view one last time. Somewhere, in the distance, a plane soared across the horizon, its lights blinking against the dark canvas of the sky. It reminded her of the day she'd boarded a flight years ago, leaving behind everything familiar to embrace the unknown. Back then, she hadn't known where life would take her, but now, as she stood here, she realized she was exactly where she was meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be challenges to face, obstacles to overcome, and moments of doubt. But she faced them with the same resilience and determination that had brought her this far. Because she knew, deep down, that the strongest bridges weren't built overnight, they were forged through patience, perseverance, and unwavering belief in the power of human connection. And so, their story continued not as a tale of a millionaire and a maid, but as a reminder that greatness often lies in the most unexpected places. In a world divided by borders, languages, and cultures, they had found a way to unite, proving that true understanding begins when we choose to see each other, not as strangers, but as fellow travelers on the same journey.